Hello Year 11 and welcome to your third revision session on Christian beliefs. This session is going to focus on different Christian beliefs about creation. As always, we're going to focus on making sure that you feel confident enough to explain two key ideas about creation, two influences and a quote to enable you to tackle any question that comes up in the exam. To start us off, we're going to look at creation more broadly. The concept of creation simply means the bringing of the world into existence. So for Christians, that is the belief that the world is God's loving creation. If you need two key beliefs to support this in an exam question, you could focus on these. Firstly, Christians believe that God created the universe out of nothing. We talked about this when we looked at God's omnipotence. So this is a nice belief or teaching that you can use in multiple places on your exam. Christians believe that God existed before the universe. In other words, he is eternal and has always been there. Therefore, God is the only being who is able to create the universe, as he was the only thing that existed before it did. Secondly, Christians believe that humans were created in the image of God, or what we might say as Imago Dei. Now, this doesn't mean that Christians physically look like God, but what it means for Christians here is that they have some of the qualities that God has in terms of their morals, for example, and how they can choose to act. So, how might these two beliefs influence Christians? Well, firstly, to worship God. The creation of the universe is another example of God's omnipotence and reinforces the idea that he is the most powerful being in existence and therefore worthy of worship. Secondly, if you believe that the universe was created by God, that might influence a Christian to care for the world, partly because the world is God's creation, but also because God placed humankind in the earth with the responsibility to care for the earth as stewards. A quote that you could use to back this up is this one about being made in the image of God. Simply says, so God created man in his own image. You can use this to support the idea of humans being created Imago Dei. The creation story can be found in Genesis, in the first chapter of the Bible. However, different Christians will read and interact and engage with this story in different ways. We're going to look at two different possible ways of looking at the creation story. The first is the literalist view of creation. A literal interpretation means understanding something based solely on the primary meaning of the words that are being used. In other words, you are taking that story as it's written, without looking for any underlying meaning. A Christian who interprets the creation story in a literal way will read the story as it is written. So a key belief they might hold could be that God created everything in the universe in 6 24-hour days and that he rested on the seventh. They would believe that the order of things being created are exactly as they are written in the Bible. Secondly, they might use this as to reinforce the belief that there is a clear plan and an order to God's creation. So there was a reason why each of those things were made on separate days, and that God created things in that order for part of his greater purpose. Even if those accounts don't coincide exactly with scientific accounts, for example, a literalist Christian is likely to say that the creation story is an accurate account and that shows that order and purpose even if humans can't fully understand it. Two ways in which these beliefs might influence Christians is, again, reinforcing that idea of God's omnipotence. If God is able to create something as incredibly complex as the universe in 6 short days, and to create things in a particular order, that reinforces the idea that God is omnipotent, and that quote that we looked at from the first session, that anything is possible with God. Secondly, a literalist might be influenced to accept the creation story in Genesis as an accurate account of how the universe came to exist. So they may not, for example, believe in scientific theories of the existence of the universe because they may not see them as compatible. You can use the quote anything is possible with God from our first session to link to that idea of God's omnipotence, or you can use this quote, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Again, that emphasizes God's omnipotence and also reminds Christians that God is the source of creation. Alternatively, some Christians may interpret the Genesis story of creation in a non-literalist way. By that, we mean that a non-literalist interpretation would involve understanding the story as something to be taken as more symbolic or a more metaphorical representation of the truth rather than an accurate account of how creation happened. Beliefs that might come from this could include, firstly, the idea that the creation story in the Bible should be understood and taken into account as a reflection of the time in which it was written. That the people at the time would have had a less scientific understanding of the world and would have been trying to make sense of the world around them and trying to understand more about God, but with less information than we have now. Secondly, the creation story for many Christians is something that can still be understood alongside scientific theories. In other words, the scientific accounts don't replace the creation story. Even though we know more from scientific theories about how the universe was created and how life has developed over time, that does not mean for a non-literalist that they no longer believe that God is the creator of the universe. What a non-literalist will often say is that the science is able to explain the detail and to provide that level of context as to how life has developed over a long period of time. However, religion, particularly in this case Christianity, still provides the idea of the explanation as to God being the creator of the universe. Still provides that meaning to Christians that the source of all life still comes from God, and that without God, the rest of it would not be possible. So, in terms of influences, they remain largely the same. Whether you're a literalist or a non-literalist, your belief in God as the most powerful being in existence and being worthy of worship remains the same. So a non-literalist Christian could still be influenced to worship God and to give thanks to God for his creation. Secondly, again, if the source of the universe is God, non-literalist Christians would still be influenced to care for the earth and see themselves as stewards, caring for something that belongs ultimately to God. And again, you can use this same quote to emphasize the power of God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So in a moment, I'm going to get you to pause this video and have a go at these two practice questions. You have one 4-mark question and one 6-mark question to answer relating to Christian beliefs about creation. Using the same structure and approach that we have used in our previous videos, I want you to have a go at these ones on your own. Once you've done that, you can replay the video and I will walk you through some possible model answers which you can compare to your own responses. So pause the video now and have a go. There's not a huge variety of ways in which the example can ask you questions about this, so it'll be up to you to explain the different views on creation within the body of your answer. So let's take a look at this 4-mark question. Explain 2 ways in which beliefs about creation influence Christians today. Christians could be influenced to worship God and give thanks. This is because God is believed to be the creator of the universe and nothing would exist without him. Christians could also care for the environment. This is because Earth is part of God's creation and they were given the responsibility by God to look after it as stewards of the earth. So here you see highlighted in yellow the 2 clear influences: to worship God and give thanks, and also to care for the environment. If you want to have a go at practicing this question, see if you can come up with 2 other influences that belief in creation could have on a Christian today. Let's have a look at a 5-mark question. Explain 2 Christian teachings about creation. Refer to sacred writings or another source of Christian belief and teaching in your answer. Here's a response. Some Christians believe that the world was created by God in 6 24-hour periods. with a day of rest. This is because they interpret the creation story in a more literal sense and believe that the Bible provides an accurate account to explain how the world came to exist. Many Christians believe that God gave humans a special status within his creation. Unlike other living beings, humans were made in God's image, meaning that they have some of the same qualities of God. And this can be seen in the Bible where it says, "So God created man in his own image." So here I have two different interpretations of the creation story. One is a literal interpretation perspective, and another is focusing there on the status of humans. Two very separate points. Both have got developed explanations, and to get that fifth mark, there is a clear quote highlighted there in green, and I've remembered to show the examiner the source of my quote, which is of course the Bible. Again, if you want to have a go at doing this question on your own, see if you can come up with two other points to explain two Christian teachings about creation.